Hey everybody, it's Bobby Gaines here, talking a little Boston Celtics basketball a few days after they've been eliminated from the playoffs by the Atlanta Hawks, and that was a tough series. I mean, I knew as soon as the Celtics were matched up with the Hawks that it was going to be a tough series, especially with Atlanta having the home field advantage. I mean, the Celtics couldn't do anything when they played the Hawks in Atlanta. I mean, they lost the last game in Boston to the Hawks, but even that game was closer than most of the ones in Atlanta. Game 2, they scored 7 points in the first quarter. Game 5, they were smoked after getting off to a good start. And, the whole series, I mentioned that good start, and then even in Game 1, they came back and they almost won that game. But the Celtics showed signs that they could obviously hang with Atlanta. They beat them twice, and they, were in every game except for maybe Game 5 and some of Game 2. But I don't know. At the end of the day, I think Atlanta's experience is what helped them the most, because Atlanta's roster wasn't that much better than the Celtics. I know they had Al Horford and Jeff Teague, who are, let's face it, probably a better combination than Isaiah Thomas and Jay Crowder. And, of course, Jay Crowder wasn't 100%. Now, I've heard a lot of analysts say, if Avery Bradley and Jay Crowder were 100% in that series, it might have been different. I mean, all due respect to those guys, but, Jay Crowder and Avery Bradley, they're not Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. I mean, they're good players, I guess, but, it's just that this Celtics team had to have so many things go right just to win 48 games and to get to where they got. And it's really a shame in some ways, because the end of their season kind of dictated how the playoffs were going to go. They played like a really good team for most of the season. They were actually the 3 seed in the East for a lot of the season, I can remember. They were, right behind, well, not right behind, but they were behind Cleveland and Toronto in terms of win-loss record. And, of course, you had Charlotte, Atlanta, and Miami all right there. And then as the season went on and, Jay Crowder got injured for an extended period of time, the Celtics still played pretty well. But actually what really killed them in terms of their playoff seeding was their last week of the season, where they played Charlotte and Atlanta and Miami, the 3 teams they were fighting with for the 3rd playoff spot. And they beat Miami in the last game of the season, but that was after losing terribly to Atlanta and Charlotte. They got smoked in both those games, and those were games they really needed. Those were playoff-type games, because if you beat those teams, they were in the playoffs anyway, but you're in the playoffs as maybe a 3 or 4 seed instead of a 5. And the problem is, when they beat Miami through some weird tiebreaker, Miami actually got the 3 seed, and Atlanta got the 4 seed because their record was better against the Celtics. The Celtics got the 5 seed. So if they had lost to Miami, and I'm not sure how this works, they might have gone to the 6 seed. I don't know. They might have had to play Miami in the first round, who, for whatever reason, I think they could have handled Miami better. But, it's all a matchup thing, and really getting into the Celtics long-term, if they had won that first-round series, did anybody think they were beating Cleveland? No. Did anybody think they would beat, maybe, I don't even know, Toronto? Probably not. Indiana, maybe. If Indiana had found a way to upset Toronto, maybe an Indiana-Celtics series would have been an interesting one. But that's the thing. This Celtics team had to get so lucky to go far in the playoffs. But I don't want that to take away from what they did, because they really did have a great season. I mean, compared to where you thought they'd be, compared to where they were a couple years ago. And I'm still skeptical on the whole NBA rebuilding thing. I don't see too many teams in the NBA, and I'm sure there are some, and maybe even some recent examples. Maybe even Golden State kind of built through the draft. But for the most part, I can't think of a team that just went from being terrible to mediocre to pretty good to great to championship. It just doesn't seem to work that way. But the Celtics have kind of made it look like that. A couple years ago, they were a 30-win team, and then last year they won 41 games. This year they won 48 games. So I guess, if you want to believe that, that this is a building thing that has a continuum, from beginning to end, I guess they're, in the right direction. But how much stock do you really take in that? I could see this same team coming back and winning 45 games or 50 games, but does it really matter, how many games they win in terms of, playoff seeding, but, are they still any closer to Cleveland or even Atlanta if they, stay the same or get a little better? And that's where the offseason is going to be key, obviously. But I felt like for the past 3 or 4 offseasons or trade deadlines or whatever, there's been some big player rumored to be in the Celtics, crosshairs, because they do need a star player. I hate saying that, but they do need somebody you've heard of. That's what wins in the NBA. You can do all the rebuilding you want and draft these great players and have, the pieces. And that's the interesting thing. The Celtics are actually the opposite of, some of your big teams. I feel like Houston is kind of the opposite of the Celtics. The Houston Rockets have James Harden and Dwight Howard and not much else. And I feel like the Celtics have those complementary pieces that would be good around a James Harden or Kevin Durant sort of player, but they don't have the big players. So it's kind of an odd thing to see in the NBA, but it does happen. And like I said, Danny Ainge is doing the best he can. He made some pretty good trades in retrospect. I didn't really agree with trading Rajon Rondo. I still think he could have made a difference on this team, but they got Marcus Smart through the draft, who's a pretty good point guard, and they've gotten, Isaiah Thomas and Jay Crowder in the recent couple seasons. So they've built a pretty decent team. They have Avery Bradley's from back in the old Big Three days, the Celtics, Garnett, Pierce, and all them. Avery Bradley and Jared Solinger, I think, are the only two players left from those, really good teams. And Jared Solinger could be on his way out as a free agent. And Jared Solinger is an interesting one, because I really thought Jared Solinger was trending upward. I thought he was one of those under-the-radar first-round picks. The Celtics got him when they weren't like a draft lottery team. They were picking like 20th that year, I think. And they got a pretty good value, I thought, in Jared Solinger, who got a lot of double-doubles, I remember, early in his career. I mean, he wasn't lighting it up, but I thought he was going to be like an Al Jefferson type, 20 and 10 a game. Pretty good. I don't know about his defense, but I thought, Then he started taking three-point shots, which he does a lot now, jump shots and threes, and I just don't think that's his game. I think he's a good rebounder, and I think he's a good, inside shooter at times, but I know he's not going to be their leading offensive player, and definitely not their leading defensive player, but I always thought he would be better than he was, and this year he was good at times, but even in this playoff series, he was pretty much a non-factor, which is disappointing when you figure, only so many players were left for the Celtics to really make a difference, and I feel like Jared Solinger was one of those, in the top 3 or 4, Isaiah Thomas being the big one, who really showed a lot in this series, and then after him, Jay Crowder, Jerebko was pretty good, but, where was Jared Solinger and all that? Really non-existent. So going forward, obviously, the Celtics need to address these issues. They can't rely on Jared Solinger, Evan Turner, or whoever else to, step up and have big games all the time. Like I said, they're good on the players the Celtics have are good on teams that have a LeBron James or a big name player, but without that big name player, it kind of just exposes what the Celtics really have, which is some good players, but not great players. So how do you fix that problem? Well, I've heard Kevin Durant's name get debated around a lot. I don't really know what it is about the Celtics, to be honest, that doesn't attract free agents. I'm not saying that everybody should want to come to Boston, but even I think it was like Greg Monroe. There was some player last year who really wanted to go to the Milwaukee Bucks. Like, I think New York or somebody offered him more money, and he went to the Milwaukee Bucks. So, I mean, like, players do occasionally want to go somewhere other than Los Angeles. But it seems like the free agents just have such weird reasoning. Like, they want to play with LeBron, or they want to play with this one or that one. I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm just saying the Celtics are never in the running for a big free agent. Even when they had, Paul Pierce, Kevin Durant, Kevin Garnett, they had all those big players. It was, you would think maybe, because they weren't winning, they weren't a big free agent destination. Then they were winning. People still didn't want to come there. Now they're rebuilding. Will people want to come there now? I don't really know. But looking forward, the Celtics need one of those players. I think Al Horford's a little overrated. I mean, if they get him, great, I guess. It's an upgrade, but do you really want just an upgrade, or, are we at the point now where you have to start thinking a little bit bigger than that? And I don't know. I really don't know. There's not really a right or wrong answer to this. Like I said, this rebuilding thing is still very touch and go as far as I'm concerned. They look good one season. Could they look good the next season? I don't know. And the other concern is Brad Stevens, who's done a really great job, at least with what he has. Obviously you'd think if he had something better, he would turn it into a championship team, but Brad Stevens, as it were, he's in the third year of his deal. This was the third year of his deal. He signed a 5-year deal to come to the Celtics. Next year will be the 4th year. So, hopefully they re-sign him. Because I'd hate to think that this is just a temporary kind of boost to the team. Like Isaiah Thomas, obviously I hope they keep him long-term, and a few other players. But, I don't know. It's just this could go one of two ways. They could either get that big player this season or next season, and they could go from there, or I could just as easily see this team falling apart. I could see them, losing Isaiah Thomas, losing, their Evan Turner and all them, losing them and having to draft again and, blah, blah, blah. And speaking of the draft, I think it's interesting that the Celtics might have a big draft pick this year if the Brooklyn pick turns into a number 1 or 2 or 3, and yet I'm hearing all this talk about, trading that pick. Wasn't this whole thing to get a number 1 pick? Like, isn't that why we traded Pierce and Garnett? Isn't that why we invested, took away all the talent off this team at one point and just went for the draft so we get 20 draft picks and turn them into a superstar? Now, that hasn't really worked. But if they get a number 1 pick, and nobody's willing to give them a Kevin Durant or whatever, which I don't think they would be. But, you get the number 1, number 2 pick. Isn't that what the Celtics wanted? Isn't that why we wanted to tank all those years ago? The Celtics never, just like they never get a free agent, they never get a number 1 pick. I can't remember the last time they picked number 1 or 2. Even when they sucked, they picked like 5. I mean, they get terrible luck in the draft lottery. Maybe this year they'll get luckier because it's technically Brooklyn's pick. But I don't know. I'd find it a little frustrating, and I don't really know who's out there as far as college players go, but I'd be a little frustrated if after all this they get a number 2 pick and they go, nah, no, we'll trade them. Like, this is all they wanted, I thought. Now, if they could trade that number 2 pick for, I don't know, DeMarcus Cousins or James Harden or something, then yeah, sure, do it, but I just don't see that deal out there. And if it is out there, then fine, maybe it finally pays off, but there's just so much luck involved and so much, I don't know. It's whatever. But I do want to commend the Celtics on a good step forward. It really was fun watching them this season. Even when they were playing a team that I knew was better than them, I didn't feel like they were guaranteed to lose the game, and sometimes they didn't. They did beat Golden State this year. They did beat the Clippers. They beat Cleveland. They beat all the good teams at least once. They beat the Thunder in Oklahoma. So, I mean, I guess they're all just moral victories, but, the Celtics did show that they could hang with those teams, whereas I think last year they were getting smoked more often than not. Maybe next year they beat Toronto more often, because I think that's the next step. I think is to get to Toronto's level. Toronto is probably the second or third best team in the East, so maybe you get to that level, because everybody's still looking up at Cleveland in the East, no matter what you do. You still got to go through Cleveland to get to the finals, so maybe they add a big player, maybe they don't. I don't know. Share your thoughts on it. Either way, go Celtics. Pretty good season, but we'll see what's up to come.